Hi, I'm John Bennett, Face2Face Program Director at Kids Escaping Drugs in West Seneca. Kids Escaping Drugs was founded to support the Renaissance Campus. And for those of you who might not know what the Renaissance Campus is it's a rehab facility in West Seneca for adolescents battling addiction to drugs and alcohol. Now, with the Face2Face program at Kids Escaping Drugs, our role is to educate the community on dangers of drugs, alcohol, addiction, and especially how it relates to adolescents. Our goal is to hopefully prevent the people we meet with and we educate from ever ending up at a place like our campus. However, it is a wonderful place for those who truly need the services. Today, we're going to be focusing on marijuana. And we're focusing on marijuana because people really don't see the potential consequences of use with marijuana. They don't see it as a drug that could be detrimental to their use. In many cases, it's normalized and encouraged in a lot of adolescents as well. That's not so much the case. A lot of people don't understand that marijuana today is a lot different than marijuana that we've seen in the decades past, both in its strength, but also in its form too. We're going to look at some of that today in this presentation. A lot of people also don't see that you can have potential consequences with marijuana, and many potential consequences can arise from adolescents who abuse this stuff. And we're going to dive into some of that today and hopefully familiarize yourselves with a little bit more about what we're seeing currently with marijuana.
Now, many people hear rehab facility like the Renaissance campus, and they assume that everybody here on our campus is battling addiction to heroin, cocaine, meth, and substances like that. And yes, some of them are, but many of our kids, I'd say at least half of them, actually claim marijuana as their main drugs of choice. Now, these are not kids who are just using marijuana every now and again on weekends and stuff like that. These are those kids who made their whole life about getting high. You know, kids who were involved in sports, clubs, and activities, and then got to the point where they quit all that to focus solely on using. Kids who were good students in school, then maybe got to the point where they couldn't go to school unless they were high. Maybe dropped out altogether. Kids who started getting involved in the legal system, stuff like that. We also see so many kids start their drug use with marijuana. Now, some of these kids might use it for a while and move on to something else. Some of these kids might use it for a while and then stop using it. But rest assured, some kids will mess up their life using marijuana alone. Now, we're constantly asked when we're doing presentations if we consider marijuana a gateway drug. And I love the way that our adolescents from campus answer this question, and I kind of share their answer to that too. They'll say, regardless if you think marijuana is a gateway drug or not, it is 100% a gateway to that lifestyle. It brings you around people you wouldn't have been around before. It brings you around other substances. It brings you around a higher probability of getting something that's potentially laced. It brings you around potential legal consequences as well. So regardless if you say it's not a gateway drug, you cannot dispute that it's for sure a gateway to that lifestyle. Also, marijuana has a high probability of potentially being laced too. Now, I used to hear statistics from various agencies in the past and think to myself, man, these numbers, they have to be exaggerated. They have to be scare tactics, right? Well, that's not so. These numbers are correct. We have seen it firsthand too. One of my favorite parts of my job is getting to know the kids from our campus and hearing their personal stories and experiences. And we had a young man on our campus a couple years back who was part of our face-to-face program who would go out and speak to area students about the dangers of addiction. And with his story, he started smoking marijuana in 8th grade with his girlfriend. But every morning after smoking with her, he was getting sicker and sicker to the point he was getting almost deathly sick in the morning. Now, at first, he thought his girlfriend was simply just getting bad marijuana from somewhere. But he found out a little bit later on that that wasn't what was happening at all. What was happening was his girlfriend was taking an opiate painkiller called Percocet and grinding up in the grinder with the marijuana. She had a pre-existing addiction to opiates that he had no idea about. And her mindset was, man, it's going to make things a lot easier on me if I can get him hooked on this too, so I don't have to go through it alone. And that's exactly what was happening when this young man was getting sick. He was going through extreme opiate withdrawals. And what extreme opiate withdrawals feel like is, the worst flu ever times 1,000, hot and cold sweats, diarrhea, and vomiting. The only way to make that go away is to put more opiates in your system. So she had him exactly where she wanted him. Their addiction spiraled from there. Within weeks, She was using heroin. He had moved on to higher grade painkillers too, like Opana, but he wound up getting arrested and sent to our campus. When he would go out and speak, he would tell kids, look, that was somebody that I loved, somebody that I trusted. Never in a million years did I ever think that she would be doing something like that to me. And so many of our adolescents have similar experiences to that. I'm constantly meeting with parents and grandparents who tell me, hey, I smoked marijuana when I was younger. What's the big deal? Well, the deal is the marijuana of today is a heck of a lot stronger than the marijuana of the 60s, 70s, even the 80s and the 90s. It's so much stronger today than it's ever been. And if we look at the THC content in marijuana as shown on the screen here, what THC is it's the main psychoactive compound within marijuana that gives off that high sensation. Now in the 60s and 70s, and even in the 80s, this was very low in the THC content. It was 1 to 3% THC. Today, regular dry plant-based marijuana is 15 to 25%. Now, when we say marijuana, we're quick to think the plant, but that's not always the case, which we've seen in concentrates. Now, even that 15 to 25%, that's a far cry from that 1 to 3%. It's significantly stronger. These concentrates, though, 25 to 90% THC in marijuana concentrates. And it's usually on the higher end of that spectrum. It's usually never on the lower end of that spectrum. And for those of you who might not be familiar with what concentrates are, is consider orange juice concentrate for a second. You know, the frozen stuff you mix with water, it turns into orange juice. It's the exact opposite concept of that. So what people are doing is they're taking the marijuana and they're extracting that THC from it to a very strong condensed compound that's much more stronger than regular marijuana. So it's like the exact opposite of that orange juice concentrate. Now, this stuff isn't being made in labs by scientists necessarily. This could be made in the bedrooms of high school, middle school students fairly simply. They can be walked through how to make this stuff. Now, it can also be very volatile, especially when they're using, butane gases and stuff like that. We actually had a young lady in the past who was on our campus who had burned off all her hair and eyebrows through an explosion when she was making this stuff. So this stuff is very dangerous to make in some circumstances, but it's not that difficult. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is all these states that are legalizing marijuana, they're not taking into account the THC content. So there's really not the regulations that need to be in place. We've seen packaging come in from other states where it's listed as 85 to 90% THC, and unfortunately these packagings are very similar to what we've seen in the vaping solutions in the recent past. We've seen THC solutions packaging with Flintstones characters on it, Fruity Pebbles, with 85 to 90% THC. Very concerning for an adolescent to get their hands on that stuff. Now again, I mentioned that when we think of marijuana, we're quick to assume that it's always, dry plant form of marijuana. We don't usually think marijuana concentrates. We certainly do not think Kool-Aid, cereal, candy. These are all items that I found quickly for sale being sold via Facebook by individuals right in the Western New York area. I didn't have to do much digging for this. This stuff's out there, but we don't think of these items when we think of marijuana. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was 5 or 6 years old, I loved Kool-Aid, cereal, and candy. And if this stuff was laying around the house, you can bet I was going to get my paws into it. So we definitely need to be cognizant that this stuff's out there and it could potentially be in the same house as very young children. I want to encourage anyone who has concerns about an adolescent in their life experimenting with drugs or alcohol to please contact us for an early intervention. It's a great starting spot. They meet with a trained program counselor and they meet with other adolescents in recovery. It is a great place to start and it's 100% free of charge.
As always, if you or someone you love is in need of help, do not hesitate to reach out to Kids Escaping Drugs at 716-827-9462 or visit our website at www.ked.org.